Watch this.
It's a topic they've tried to tackle for 2 years now. Mask mandates. Despite the state of Idaho never having one, some cities and schools have. One lawmaker wants to make sure it can never happen again at any level. The 15th Amendment gave everyone in America the right to vote, regardless of race. An edict that eventually made its way to Idaho and played a part in deciding a close race for sheriff. Some of Idaho's black history can sometimes be hard to find, sure. Others stand out a bit more. How a former slave came to Idaho and later became a part of the Gem State's landmarks. We've apparently passed our peak. Omicron is waning across the country, driving several states like Illinois and New York to say they plan to let their statewide public mask mandates expire. Everywhere, that is, except for schools. Governors of other states, including Oregon right next door, say they plan to lift their school mask mandates by the end of March. So what about Idaho? Well, we've never had a statewide mask mandate for any reason. We have had mask wearing requirements issued at the local levels. That includes counties, cities, and school districts. And that has proven to be a big problem, leading to protests outside health district offices and sending people to school board meetings to testify why they shouldn't send their kids to school wearing them. Well, last year, it also prompted State Representative Carrie Hanks of St. Anthony to try to pass a bill that would have outlawed mask mandates everywhere. It ultimately failed. She tried again during the special session in November. That failed too. So Hanks brought it back this year. And this morning, she formally introduced it in committee where the public was able to testify. And the reaction was mixed for a number of reasons. Here's Katya Stepovic.
If people were dying in the streets and we felt that a mask would change that, then I believe that we would wear them.
I'm certain that if we had massive people dying in the streets for because the disease was as virulent as we might hope, against, we wouldn't need mandates. Everyone would be protecting themselves automatically.
The same message 1 week apart. People aren't dying on the streets, but they are dying in hospitals. Almost 4,500 Idahoans dead from the virus since the pandemic began nearly 2 years ago. More than the population of St. Anthony, which Hanks represents. Wednesday morning, she argued for a third time in a little more than a year that mask mandates should be outlawed.
They're tired of the mandates and they're feeling ready to live with the risk that remains. And I think we're at the point in Idaho where we are more than ready to deal with whatever risks there are.
Of the 3 members of the public who testified on the bill, 2 supported Hanks' motion.
The younger kids who have grown up through this have lost an average of 20 IQ points, and that is devastating. And I would say that a big piece of that is likely because of masks, because children need to see faces in order to learn and grow.
But according to Dr. David Peterman, CEO of Primary Health, there's no evidence to support that claim.
There is no credible scientific evidence that masks in themselves cause anxiety or depression in children. There's absolutely no evidence that masks impact childhood development or learning. If you look at, for example, motor and language development in children that are severely visually impaired, it's equal to their peers.
He says what does impact child development is pulling them out of school because of COVID exposures. He says there is evidence that wearing masks indoors is effective against the spread of COVID. Take this, for example, a study by the CDC that was presented in the Idaho Health and Welfare's meeting Tuesday, showing that wearing a cloth mask lowers your odds of testing positive for COVID by 56%, a surgical mask 66%, and an N95 or KN95 83%. And people like Stephanie Mickelson, College of Eastern Idaho trustee, believe passing a bill like this would be nothing but harmful.
Government closest to the people is best, and the state of Idaho continually complains about the federal government, and yet here the state is trying to make rules that would then prohibit people on the local level from doing what they feel is best for their people. And individual school districts have boards that run them that can then determine if it's in the best interest of their people or the best interest of their group, whether or not to have mask mandates if there's a health emergency. And if we pass a law right now that says we prohibit that, what happens if you have something that is even more significant than COVID in the future? You have this bill that says you can't do that.
The bill passed in a party line vote with both Democrats voting against it. It now heads to the House floor.
The government's role is to secure the rights of and freedoms of citizens and not dictate our health choices. And that's what these mask mandates are doing.
We're just talking about this, Katya. I can't believe we're almost 2 years into this pandemic and we're still talking about whether or not masks are good and effective or not. Anyway, beside the point, this obviously would be a law that if it goes through would mean that you can't wear a mask, right?
No, obviously you could still wear a mask. Those who choose to wear a mask can continue to do so, but they would be around, many more people who probably wouldn't be, and it would no longer be a requirement. And then we do run into the issue, and I talked to Peterman about this, and the possibility of having bullying in schools that we have all heard about before, and it goes away both ways, rather, if you're wearing a mask or you're not. Just getting picked on, kids in differences, doing different things. And also another note here, Brian, this is really interesting. Since we first did this story last week, there have been an additional 76 Idahoans who have died from COVID. Although they may not be dying on the streets, people are indeed dying from this virus.
Absolutely. And just as you mentioned, more than the population of St. Anthony, where Representative Hanks is from. Thanks, Katya. I already mentioned being on the backside of the Omicron wave. That's based on what we heard yesterday from health leaders who said as such. Good indicator of where we stand and what's to come when it comes to COVID in the community has usually been what is being seen in the city's wastewater. We're told instead of relying on individual tests, that proverbial litmus test of wastewater gives us a better idea of when to expect a spike in cases and when we could see a drop-off. So what does that, we've heard from the state yesterday, so what does it mean when we come to the cities? Are we matching what we're seeing in the state's capital city?
We are seeing a reduction or a downward trend line, and it's probably about a reduction about 60% from levels about 2 weeks ago. If it follows the same trend that some of those cities like the New York, the Boston, et cetera, are seeing, then it's currently trending that way, and that would be a great sign.
A downward trend of 60% is a good sign. Merton also says they have the ability to get a sampling of variant data from wastewater samples. And in the samples from January 24th, there was only one variant there. 100% of it was Omicron. Another reason wastewater is helpful, it paints a more accurate picture of our situation. We reported the state has been dealing with a deep layer of cases unprocessed, like 40,000 cases deep. Well, they've been gaining ground on those as well and adding them to our daily total. So our official COVID case numbers may not actually reflect the spread in our community in real time, unlike wastewater.
And so basically the great thing about this is it just provides another data point or set of data that you can use to just inform your decisions.
Right, so case numbers are one thing. As far as hospitalizations go, it is too soon to tell if we've hit our peak there, as numbers are still pretty high. But we'll keep taking the good news when we can get it. All right, so the state of Idaho has not had a stellar history when it comes to lawsuits involving laws passed by the legislature. Since 2004, the state has been on the losing end of 9 cases, laws that were challenged for being unconstitutional. Remember last summer when the courts decided the voter initiative law that would have increased the number of districts needed to get an initiative on a state ballot? They decided that was unconstitutional. Well, a couple of others are still tied up in the legal process, like the transgender athlete ban. At least one senator, though, wants the legislature to be able to intervene in those lawsuits. This afternoon, Senator Mary Souza of Coeur d'Alene says the bill would allow the legislature to play a legal role if there is a lawsuit questioning constitutionality of said law. Well, usually when the state of Idaho is named as the defendant, it's just a two-party situation. It's the lawsuit between the individual or group bringing the suit and the defendant, which happens to be the state. Third parties, interveners, are only usually allowed with permission of the court. Well, this bill would give the legislature the ability to jump in anytime. Why? Well, that part wasn't explained very well during the Senate Judiciary and Rules Committee, who decided it was good enough to go ahead with it. By the way, the legislature was allowed to intervene in 2 lawsuits challenging that voter initiative law last summer, which they ended up losing. So far, Idaho has paid more than $3 million in legal fees defending 8 of those 9 lawsuits. And that money comes out of the Constitutional Defense Fund created in 1995 to defend the state's legal rights against the federal government. And it's a fund that is filled by your tax dollars. Mere months after being allowed to vote, a black man from Boise helped decide who would be sheriff in Ada County. Now local historians want to make sure John West gets the credit and attention he deserves.
4th of July Lake and the Blackmon Peak area is one of the most popular areas for recreation in the whole White Clouds.
Deep in the heart of the White Cloud Mountains lies a larger-than-life piece of Idaho's Black history. All right, time for a reminder to send us your text messages. We love hearing what you have to say, usually. 208-321-5614. That's the number. This is the criteria. Ask us a question, provoke us with a comment, charm us with a complaint. Just be sure to include your name and the hashtag #the208. If it's clean, clever, and concise, we could share it at the end of the show. So stick around. While the history of Black people in Idaho isn't necessarily widespread, it does run deep. We've tried to touch on a few of them over the years here on the 2-8, not just during Black History Month, but throughout the year. Stories about Elvina Moulton or Joe and Lou Wells or the St. Paul Baptist Church. But in the middle of Black History Month, we thought we'd dive into a couple of historical icons that you may or may not have known. One stands more than 10,000 feet high. The other, sadly, 6 feet deep. The latter would be the story of John West, the first Black man to cast a ballot in Idaho. In the northwest corner of Morris Hill Cemetery, known as Section 1, there are many stones marking spots for those deceased. Names like Wyman, Peacock, or Kelly. One name not noted, at least one grave left unmarked in this plat of plots, one John West, who died in October of 1903.
John West was a Black man who was a resident of the Boise area.
One of our dearly departed, worthy of distinction.
Well, this story goes back really to territorial days, to an election in 1870. During this election, they were voting for Ada County Sheriff.
It was an election where William Bryan was leading Lute Lindsay by a count of 419 to 418.
But there was one ballot that hadn't been counted. It was the ballot of John West.
Why hadn't West's vote been counted? Well, according to Rick Just, the poll workers probably didn't know what to do with it, because the 15th Amendment had just been ratified earlier that year, giving every citizen the right to vote, regardless of race.
So they thought, well, he's never voted before. Now he's voting.
So they set it aside.
His vote was not counted originally just because he was a Black man.
Then there was the bit about being able to read his ballot.
What the issue was at that point was they were writing the names in. And we're not all perfect spellers, and a lot of those people got those names wrong.
So this was kind of like basically a literacy test to vote.
Well, in a sense, it was. That's a good point.
So it sounds like they're like, well, he's a Black man, so we can't count his vote. Oh, wait, yes, you have to. Oh, well, it looks like he didn't spell the name right. Oh, wait, yes, he did. Was it that kind of a process?
It's not completely transparent because it was, after all, 1870, so it was a while ago. But that's what it looked like, yes. But they eventually did count John West's vote, and it turned out his was the vote that assured the election for one William Bryan. He became sheriff.
So that's how John West became the first Black man to vote in Boise.
As far as we know, yes.
As for that unmarked grave, well, the goal is to have it marked, finally. For John West to no longer remain unknown.
We want to give a little clue to why he's important. And I think maybe something to put on the headstone would be what the Idaho Statesman called him was the Dean of Colored Pioneers in Idaho.
Maybe we'll think about that one a little bit. Probably not put that one on the gravestone. Well, Rick Just and another local historian, Bob Hartman, decided to start a GoFundMe to raise $1,000 to pay for a headstone for John West. And they raised it in just one day this week. Anything donated over that amount, they tell us, will be going to the Idaho Black History Museum. A couple of other stories about John West, though, I wanted to share with you. A few months after that election in 1870, Sheriff Bryan arrested West on a charge of battery for a fight he got into. Well, West was found guilty and fined $107, which is about $2,277 in today's money. So West refused to pay it. His case went all the way to the Idaho Supreme Court, who ruled in his favor because, well, Sheriff Bryan never told him why he was arrested in the first place. Then years later, after Idaho became a state, West went on to work as a porter at the State House. Master of Legislative Cloakroom, he was called. But apparently he wasn't paid for it. And according to the Idaho Statesman, at the end of the 1901 session, House members had to pass a resolution to pay West, quote, in the same manner of the clerks of this House, end quote. He was paid $60. All right, arriving in the Gem State around the same time as John West was a miner and prospector named George Blackmon, a former slave who went west in search of financial success. Well, he found it in Idaho, mining for lead, silver, and gold on the east side of the Sawtooth. He may have pulled some valuable minerals out of Idaho, but he left enough of an impression to stand out in Idaho's history. In Custer County, in the Sawtooth Recreation Area, stand the White Cloud Mountains.
Really an iconic place.
With more than 24 peaks rising more than 10,000 feet, you can see why the early pioneers had a hard time knowing when the mountains stopped and the sky began. One of those peaks is Blackmon, named for George Blackmon. However, at first, it was spelled with an A instead of an O, a reference to his race, not his name.
History's a little sparse, actually. He was born a slave in Kentucky. He was born in the 1850s. He came to Idaho when it was still a territory as a miner in the late 1870s.
Blackmon was one of thousands drawn to the Gem State in search of riches. But he made a name for himself, reflecting more than the color of his skin.
He was a long-time fixture and a miner and a prospector in the White Clouds, and was someone who grew to prominence in the area, and I think that's indicated by the fact that they named a peak after him.
Blackmon died in 1936, but his legacy continues in one of the most popular spots in central Idaho.
It's really very close to the trailhead that many people use when they go into 4th of July Lake. So 4th of July Lake and the Blackmon Peak area is one of the most popular areas for recreation in the whole White Clouds. It's where people take their families when their kids are young. It's a great hike. There's a beautiful lake at 4th of July, and you're doing that all under the shadow of Blackmon Peak.
Pretty cool pictures. It's believed that several other areas in the White Clouds are also named after George Blackmon, whose full name was George Blackmon Washington. And those places include Washington Basin, Washington Creek, and Washington Peak. George was buried in Clayton Cemetery in Custer County. Man, not even in the top 5 anymore. All right, Team Idaho back on deck again tonight in primetime. Meridian High grad Andrew Blauser will compete in the skeleton event. Kind of like the luge, but instead of laying on your back, you're going to go down that track head first on your stomach. Blauser, who currently coaches volleyball and track and field at Capitol High School, also got a shout out from Grammy winner Sarah Bareilles on Instagram yesterday. Good for him. And he's already received an invitation to visit the White House when the games are completed. That's what you look like during doing the skeleton. It looks pretty treacherous. He competes tonight at 6:30, and you can watch that live online, but we also have a link to do that at ktvb.com. You're also able to watch him on replay on the USA Network. That happens at 9:45 tonight. By the way, Blauser is the only American competing in the skeleton event in these games. So you might say it's a bare bones team.
Did you notice it was warmer today? Did you walk outside and say, I can do this? Yeah, look at it, 50 degrees. We had 50 degrees this afternoon. The average is 44 degrees. Tell you a little bit more. There's the 50 there, Caldwell, 50 degrees, 48 degrees for Nampa. It was 39 in Twin Falls. Air quality is better too. Look at this. Even down in the valley, it's pretty good. And I think here momentarily in Nampa, it's going to turn to green as well, but it's going to stay yellow in Twin Falls and it's green in Sun Valley. 7-day forecast, just to mention that we had a really good mixing today. You could almost say that the inversion likely was mixed enough to call it almost gone. However, the high pressure ridge over the top of it is still holding in place. So based on this, we could be another day tomorrow that's lower to mid 40s, or we could be a little warmer if we continue to see some of that mixing that's taking place. And that's what these numbers are based on. If you see temperatures in the 40s. Also next Monday, there's a storm system with plenty of wind. Not a lot of snow, but in the mountains could get a couple of inches. And that's going to blow out what bit of inversion we have left. And the rest of the week then, look at those temperatures in the mid 40s. Enjoy it.
Danny, I'm going to All right, final minute and a half of the show here. Before we get to your comments, we want to say happy birthday to Joe Paris. You may have noticed he isn't here today, but he's taking a much-deserved day off for his birthday. And we wanted to share that with you so we could tell him as well, happy birthday, Joe. Hope you're enjoying your day off. We'll be back here tomorrow. All right, let's get to your comments you sent in during the show. A lot of people commenting on this legislative intervening bill that's out there to get inside a lawsuit that could be against the state because of a bill that is passed and goes to court. Funny, Idaho established a legal fund to fight federal overreach, says Jan, but has no trouble overriding mandates enacted by localities. That is super interesting, she says. I guess we know where our tax surplus is going to go, the fund to continue fighting unconstitutional legislation, says Lori, who is shaking her head. If the government can mandate an individual who has to wear clothing to avoid others being offended or annoyed thereby, even states the code, awesome. It seems perfectly reasonable to mandate mask use to prevent the spread of disease, says Taylor. Let individual and jurisdiction decide if masks are required or not. We don't need a statewide prohibition, says Bill. And this one. So what happened to local control, to small government, mandating no mandate from the state level and not giving local citizens local rights certainly isn't small or local. A lot of sentiments just like that. Ran into a mom and young son at a park this afternoon. The kid wearing a mask, had a light sword. Mom said he insists on wearing a mask, thinks it's cool, says Kathleen. And this one, our children's IQ is directly related to the IQ of their parents. Masks don't teach our children, says Larry. We'll see you tomorrow.